They said it was impossible. Every civilization in the known galaxy, 1,000 species, 1,000,000 years of combined wisdom, had agreed on one absolute truth. Neutron stars were untouchable, sacred in their danger, eternal in their silence. The Galactic Council had not just warned against going near them, they had banned it, forbidden it, written it into the founding law of interstellar civilization itself. Then humanity showed up with blueprints. If you're new here, welcome to HFY Endurance Tales. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us, would you live on a neutron star? Now buckle in, because this story is just getting started. The decree was old, older than most species could meaningfully comprehend. Carved first into quantum-bonded crystal tablets by the Veth, a silicon-based civilization that had existed for 11 million years before Earth's oceans had even cooled. The Galactic Council's Exclusion Protocol 001 was the oldest law in recorded interstellar history. It read simply, "No sentient being, vessel, structure, or artificial construct shall approach, orbit, land upon, or claim dominion over any collapsed stellar remnant. Violation constitutes a threat to galactic stability and shall be met with immediate and unanimous response." The language was calm. The intent behind it was pure, primal terror. Commander Aaron Mitchell had read the decree 17 times in the past week alone. Not because he needed to memorize it, he had it committed to memory after the third reading, but because each time he finished it, he found himself laughing. He was standing at the observation port of the Deep Space Research Station Resolute, 43 light-years from Earth, watching the star charts update in real time. The data was undeniable. PSR J0437, a millisecond pulsar roughly 2,000 light-years away, was rotating at 700 times per second. Its surface gravity was approximately 200 billion times that of Earth. A single teaspoon of its material weighed roughly 10 million tons. It was the most hostile environment in the known universe. Aaron had already named the building site. He called it Foundation 1. "You're doing it again," said Dr. Carl Preston, the station's chief material scientist. He had walked in silently, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and was now watching Aaron with the particular expression of a man who had long since accepted that his commanding officer was completely unhinged. The staring, the smiling, it's unsettling. "I'm thinking," Aaron said, "about the neutron star, about the real estate opportunity." Carl set the coffee down on the console beside him, slow and deliberate, the way a person sets something down when they want to choose their next words very carefully. "Aaron, the Galactic Council has maintained Exclusion Protocol 001 for longer than our species has been using tools. Every civilization we have ever encountered, the Veth, the Sarathi Collective, the Dren, the Orion Folds, every single one of them turns pale, or purple, or whatever color they turn when they're terrified, the moment someone even mentions approaching a neutron star. The Veth Elder we met at Kepler Station literally lost structural integrity in 3 of its limbs when I mentioned we were studying pulsars." "I noticed that," Aaron said. "And you're not concerned?" "I'm fascinated." Aaron turned from the port and picked up his coffee. Every species that has ever encountered a neutron star has looked at the gravity and said, "We cannot survive this." Which is completely true in the body they currently have with the technology they currently possess. But no one has ever asked the question that actually matters. Carl waited. "What if you don't try to survive the gravity?" Aaron said. "What if you just cancel it out?" The silence that followed was long enough that Carl's coffee went cold. The idea had not come from nowhere. Humans had been working on kinetic dampening technology for decades, not for neutron stars initially, but for spacecraft inertial compensation. Moving at high acceleration in a ship was survivable, not because the human body could handle the G-forces, but because modern vessels generated a dampening field that offset the inertial load on biological tissue. The principle was simple. Create a localized field that absorbed and redistributed kinetic energy before it could act on a target object. The problem was scale. Inertial dampeners on a spacecraft were handling maybe 30, 40 G at the extreme end. The surface of a neutron star generated 200 billion G. It was not a small gap to bridge. But Aaron Mitchell had spent 6 months working with a team of 11 engineers back on Earth, Dr. Preston included, remotely. developing what they were calling the cascading field architecture. The CFA didn't try to generate a dampening field strong enough to offset 200 billion G all at once. Instead, it worked in layers, each layer absorbing a fraction of the gravitational load and passing the residual to the next. Layer upon layer upon layer. 1,000 stages deep, until by the time you reach the innermost layer, the protected zone where a human being would actually stand, the effective gravity was close to Earth normal. It worked in simulation. It worked in small-scale lab tests, using extremely dense matter analogs. And Aaron Mitchell was now looking at a neutron star and thinking about what happened when it worked to practice. The Council is going to lose their collective minds, Carl said finally. The Council, Aaron said, taking a slow sip of his coffee, can come watch. What neither of them knew yet was that the Council was already watching. Deep-range monitoring systems maintained by the Sarathi Collective, arguably the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy after the Veth, had detected the resolute sensor activity around PSR J0437 3 weeks earlier. A report had been filed, a meeting had been called, and somewhere in the spinning bureaucratic machinery of an 11,000-member interstellar governing body, a very quiet alarm had just started ringing. The galaxy had survived a lot of things. Stellar collapses, supernova cascades, the extinction of ancient species, the rise of new ones. It had seen wars, entreaties, and the slow grinding dance of civilizations rising and falling across billions of years. It had never seen anything quite like what Aaron Mitchell was about to build. The first probe reached PSR J0437 8 months later. It was unmanned, necessarily so, a dense reinforced cylinder 3 meters long and half a meter wide, packed with sensors, transmitters, and a prototype single-stage kinetic dampener, running at a fraction of full capacity. Its mission was not to land. Its mission was to get close, to take readings, to survive long enough to send data back before the gravity and radiation tore it apart. It survived for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before the hull gave out. Aaron counted it as an enormous success. 4 minutes and 17 seconds, he said, reading the telemetry at the mission debrief. The room held 9 people, his core team, the people who had signed on to this project, knowing full well that the Galactic Council had a law against it. At that proximity, without CFA support, we would have expected total structural failure in under 2 seconds. The single-stage dampener extended our window by a factor of more than 100. And we lost the probe, said Dr. Sandra West, the team's structural engineer. We got everything we needed from it first, Aaron said. The density readings on the crust are consistent with our models. Degenerate matter, crystalline lattice structure, surface temperatures approximately 1,000,000 Kelvin with localized cooling zones. The good news is the cooling zones, they exist, they're stable, and they're large enough. He pulled up the surface map on the holographic display. PSR J0437's crust was not smooth, no neutron stars was. It had regions of intense activity, where the pulsar's magnetic field lines churned plasma into lethal storms of radiation, and quieter zones where the field geometry created relative pockets of calm. Relative was doing a lot of work in that sentence. The calm zones were still environments that would vaporize an unprotected human being in microseconds, but they were calmer. And for the CFA to work, calm was what they needed. Foundation 1 goes here, Aaron said, pointing to a cooling zone in the northern magnetic hemisphere. It was approximately 40 kilometers across, vast by any reasonable construction standard, though Aaron's team had been anything but reasonable in their standards. The anchor system goes down first. We're not building on the surface, we're building into it. Sandra was the one who had designed the anchor. Calling it a foundation bolt was technically accurate and wildly inadequate. It was a composite spike, 100 meters long, constructed from a material the team had taken to calling neutronite, a synthetic alloy that mimicked the crystalline properties of degenerate matter at standard pressures. At standard gravity, neutronite was heavier than osmium and harder than anything that had ever existed in a laboratory. The idea was to drive it into the neutron star's crust using a shaped kinetic pulse, essentially a directed explosion of enormous force, and let the crust's own material bond around it as the spike settled. Whether the crust would actually bond, or simply shatter, or do something entirely outside the team's models, was one of the things they would learn when they tried. The council filed another protest, said James Harker, the team's communications officer. He was young, sharp, and deeply amused by the entire situation. This one is marked urgent. I think they mean it this time. How many is that now? Aaron asked. 14. And before us, how many protests had the council ever marked urgent? James checked his notes. 2. Once in 3000 BCE, when the Sarathi accidentally triggered a star formation event that threatened a populated system, and once in 1400 CE, when the Veth tried to dismantle a planet for raw materials without notifying the local inhabitants. So we're in historic company, Aaron said. The Veth killed 6 billion people, sir. We're building a skyscraper. What Aaron had not yet fully shared with his team, what he had been sitting with quietly for 3 weeks, turning it over in his mind during the long silent hours of Deep Space Night Watch, was the intelligence report that had come through from Earth Command. The Sarathi Collective had been monitoring their project since almost the beginning, not passively either. They had deployed 3 observation vessels to the PSRJ-0437 system, sitting at safe distance, watching. In 10,000 years of recorded history, they had fought exactly 4 wars, all of them defensive, all of them concluded with treaties rather than victories. They were patient, methodical, brilliant, and, in Aaron's assessment, deeply, profoundly afraid. What Aaron could not yet answer was whether that fear was of what humans might do to the neutron star, or of what access to the neutron star might do for humanity. The second probe launched 6 weeks later. This one carried a full 5-stage CFA array and lasted 19 minutes, sending back surface imagery so clear and strange that the team gathered around the display in silence for a long time before anyone spoke. The neutron star's surface looked almost peaceful in the cooling zone, white-blue and faintly luminous, a vast crystalline plain that stretched to a horizon impossibly close. The star's radius was only about 10 kilometers, meaning the curvature was extreme, and the horizon curved away sharply at just a few hundred meters. The plasma storms that raged across the rest of the surface were visible in the distance, towering columns of energy climbing into the magnetosphere, beautiful and annihilating in equal measure. It looks like winter, Carl said quietly. It looks like home, Aaron said. And that was when the Sarathi ambassador formally requested an emergency meeting. Ambassador Ven Sereth arrived at the Resolute via diplomatic courier ship, traveling at speeds that suggested urgency the Sarathi would never have expressed in words. The species communicated in long, layered sentences full of conditional clauses and historical references, and Ven Sereth was considered exceptionally direct by Sarathi standards, which meant the opening of the meeting consumed 45 minutes before the ambassador arrived at anything resembling a point. Aaron had prepared coffee. He drank 3 cups. Commander Mitchell, Ven Sereth said at last, the translation matrix rendering its vocal patterns into English with an eerie, fluting smoothness. The Galactic Council has authorized me to convey, in the strongest possible terms, our collective distress at the direction of your project. I appreciate you coming in person, Aaron said. The Council does not transmit certain concerns over open channels. The ambassador's eyes, 8 of them, arranged in an arc across a face that was vaguely triangular and pale blue, fixed on Aaron with an intensity that was genuinely unsettling. Commander, I must speak plainly. I'd love that. The neutron star you are studying is not simply a dangerous astronomical object. It is, in the understanding of every spacefaring civilization that has ever encountered such a body, a line. A fundamental boundary between what is survivable and what is not. The exclusion protocol was not written as a safety recommendation. It was written as a statement of cosmic reality. And we found a way past it, Aaron said simply. The silence that followed had weight to it. No civilization, Ven Sereth said carefully, has ever made that claim. We're making it now. Commander, the ambassador leaned forward slightly, a gesture Aaron had learned the Sarathi used when they wanted to convey maximum sincerity. The Council's concern is not merely for your safety, though that concern is genuine. Our concern is for what access to a neutron star represents. There it was, Aaron had been waiting for it. Energy, he said. Power, the ambassador corrected. A neutron star is not merely a source of energy. It is the most concentrated source of gravitational potential energy in the known universe, short of a black hole. A civilization with the ability to inhabit and utilize a neutron star does not simply gain a power source. It gains the ability to operate at a level of capability so far above every other civilization that no meaningful comparison exists. The Council has, for 11 million years, maintained stability through a careful balance of capability among member species. What you are proposing would shatter that balance permanently. Aaron looked at the ambassador for a long moment. He understood clearly and completely what was being said. And he understood something else too. Something the ambassador had not said, but which hung in the room like smoke. The Council wasn't afraid of what humans might do with that power. They were afraid that they couldn't stop it. Ambassador, Aaron said, I want you to pass a message back to the Council. Not as an official communique, not as a negotiating position. Just as information. He paused. We're not building a weapon. We're building a city. Then Sareth's 8 eyes blinked in a rolling sequence. A city? Foundation 1. Multiple residential spires, data processing infrastructure, gravity well energy collection arrays. We're going to live there. And we're going to invite other species to come see it. The ambassador was quiet for so long that Aaron began to wonder if he had accidentally broken something in the translation matrix. Commander Mitchell, then Sareth said at last. The gravity on the surface of PSR J0437 is 200 billion times your planet's standard. 207 billion actually, we've refined the measurement. And you intend to place residential structures on this surface. We intend to place a skyscraper on this surface, with a lobby and a view. Another long pause. What is the purpose of the view? Aaron smiled. Because it's beautiful. Back on Earth, the response to the Council's protests had taken a shape that no one in the diplomatic corps had quite predicted. The news of Foundation 1 had leaked, partly through Council communication channels that the Sarathi had not kept as secure as they believed, and partly because Aaron's team had a communications officer who understood the value of public opinion. Within 6 weeks of the ambassador's visit, Foundation 1 had become the most discussed project in human history. Not everyone was enthusiastic. There were genuine voices of concern. Ethicists, physicists, politicians who argued that the Council's warning about destabilizing galactic balance deserved to be taken seriously, that humanity was not yet ready for the responsibility that came with neutron star access. These voices were real, and Aaron respected them. But then the engineers got involved. The engineering community's response to the cascading field architecture was, in technical terms, electric. The CFA was not just a solution to the neutron star problem. It was a fundamental breakthrough in field mechanics with applications across hundreds of domains. Hospitals, spacecraft, industrial equipment. The mathematics underlying the CFA had already spawned 3 new theoretical frameworks in the first month after publication. Within a year, academic institutions were building entire departments around it. Humanity had, in trying to build something impossible, invented something extraordinary. And the more extraordinary it became, the more people wanted to go to that neutron star. Sandra West's anchor design was finalized. The first deep space construction vessel, designated the Ironclad, loaded out and began the long burn toward PSR J0437. Its cargo manifest was 300 pages long. And somewhere in the Sarathi Collective's Deep Analysis Division, a very senior analyst submitted a report concluding that if the humans successfully deployed even a basic CFA array on the neutron star's surface, the gap between human capability and Council capability would increase so rapidly that intervention would become, within a decade, structurally impossible. The report was classified at the highest level. It was leaked within a week. The Ironclad arrived at PSR J0437 on a Tuesday. Aaron Mitchell was not a sentimental man by nature. He had been a military engineer for 22 years, and military engineering had a way of burning sentiment out of a person, replacing it with the clean, practical satisfaction of things that worked and the clean, practical frustration of things that didn't. But as the Ironclad's approach vector brought it into visual range of the pulsar, close enough that the star's glow painted the hull in pale blue light, he found himself standing very still in the observation bay, not speaking, just looking. The star rotated 700 times per second. At that speed, it should have looked like a solid sphere. Instead, it looked almost like it was breathing, a faint shimmer at the equator, where the centrifugal forces created a barely detectable flattening, and across the surface, those magnificent plasma storms spinning outward in spirals, shaped by a magnetic field 1,000,000,000,000 times stronger than Earth's. CFA array is online, said Chief Engineer Daniel Brooks, reading from the deployment console. Daniel was the youngest person on the team, 31 years old, with a tendency to understate things so severely that Aaron had learned to multiply his expressions of concern by a factor of about 15. Full cascade nominal. Field integrity holding across all 1,000 stages. Effective gravity in the protected zone is, Daniel paused, checked the reading, checked it again, 9.7 meters per second squared. Earth normal was 9.8. Close enough, Aaron said. Sir. Daniel's voice was controlled, very controlled, the voice of a 31-year-old engineer who was trying very hard not to scream with joy. We're standing over a neutron star, and it feels like standing on Earth. Not yet, Aaron said. We're not standing on anything yet. Get me the anchor team. Sandra West's voice came over the comm from the forward deployment bay. Ready on Anchor 1, Commander. Deploy. The shaped kinetic pulse that drove the first neutronite spike into the crust of PSR J0437 registered on sensors across the system. The Sarathi observation vessels, still sitting at safe distance, would have detected the pulse and understood immediately what it meant. They would have transmitted a report within seconds. Aaron didn't think about that. He watched the telemetry. The spike hit the crust at precisely calculated velocity, the tip geometry designed to penetrate the crystalline degenerate matter without shattering it, threading the needle between enough force to embed and too much force to crack. For 3 seconds, the readings were ambiguous. Then, the bonding data came back. The crust had accepted the anchor. Anchor 1 is seated, Sandra said. Her voice was flat and professional, but Aaron could hear something underneath it that wasn't quite either of those things. Bonding depth confirmed. Structural integrity, nominal. Anchors 2 through 12, Aaron said. On my mark. The next 6 hours were the most technically demanding of Aaron's career. 12 anchors, each driven at precisely calibrated intervals, each bonding into the neutron star's crust with the particular crystalline perfection that Sandra's models had predicted. The CFA array expanded as each anchor seated, the protected zone growing in 3 dimensions, first a sphere 3 meters across, then 5, then 20, then large enough to encompass the deployment platform that the ironclad had extended toward the surface. When the deployment platform touched the neutron star's crust for the first time, Aaron was the one who stepped onto it. It was not quite solid underfoot in the way that Earth ground was solid. The degenerate matter of a neutron star did not yield in any conventional sense. It was harder than any terrestrial material by so many orders of magnitude that the comparison was meaningless. But through the boots of his pressure suit, Aaron could feel a faint vibration, a deep structural hum that ran up through the platform and into his bones. The star itself, spinning, alive in the way that only something as massive and violent as a collapsed stellar remnant could be alive. He stood there for about 10 seconds, just feeling it. Then he said, "Mark the time. Foundation 1 is open." The Galactic Council's response came 48 hours later. It was not a protest this time. It was an ultimatum. The document was 47 pages long in the standard galactic lingua franca, and it had been co-signed by 812 of the Council's 11,000 member species, which was an extraordinary number for any Council action, and spoke to how seriously the rest of the galaxy was taking what had just happened. The core demand was simple. Cease construction, dismantle the anchors, withdraw from the PSR J0437 system within 90 days. The consequences for non-compliance were listed in detail across pages 31 through 47. Aaron read the ultimatum in its entirety, in the station's small command room, door closed, alone. When he finished, he sat for a long time, without moving. Then he called Daniel Brooks. "I need the defensive reinforcement specs," he said. "The ones you've been quietly working on for the past 4 months." Daniel's response came after a pause that was just slightly too long to be casual. "Which ones?" The 90-day clock ran differently in deep space. Back on Earth, it ran as news cycles and political debates and emergency sessions of the United Earth Assembly, where representatives argued across 17 time zones about whether humanity had gone too far, whether the Council's concerns were legitimate, whether Foundation 1 was a triumph or a provocation or both. Polling data was released every 48 hours. Opinions shifted, commentators gave takes, historians compared the situation to every pivotal moment in human history simultaneously. On Foundation 1, the clock ran as construction shifts. Aaron had not waited for the Assembly's deliberations. The morning after receiving the ultimatum, he had convened his team and made exactly one statement. "We have 90 days. Let's see how much we can build." What followed was the most sustained engineering effort in human history, conducted in the most hostile environment any human had ever worked in, by a team of people who had chosen to be there, who understood exactly what they were doing, and who worked with the particular focused intensity of individuals who know that what they are building matters. Daniel's defensive reinforcement specs were, in Aaron's assessment, quietly brilliant. A CFA array that made habitation possible had a secondary configuration, a mode where instead of distributing gravitational load across 1,000 layers to protect a biological target, it could concentrate energy outward, creating a zone of extreme gravitational distortion around the station's exterior. In plain terms, anyone who tried to approach Foundation 1 without authorization would encounter a wall of gravity that their vessels were not equipped to handle. "It doesn't destroy anything," Daniel had explained, with the particular care of an engineer explaining something to a commander in a way that the commander could pass on to diplomats without causing an incident. "It just redirects. Any vessel that enters the outer field zone gets pushed. Very firmly." How firmly? A Sarathi heavy cruiser would experience structural stress equivalent to approximately 40 standard G at the boundary. Their hulls are rated to 12. "So we've built a wall," Aaron said. "We've built a very polite wall. That happens to be lethal to cross." Aaron approved the installation. The spires went up during weeks 3 through 7 of the 90-day window. Not one spire, 3. Foundation 1 had always been planned as a hub, not a single structure, and the construction team's deployment of prefabricated sections was something that the Ironclad's original cargo manifest had planned in detail. Each spire was designed to function independently, self-contained in terms of atmosphere, power, and CFA support, but interconnected at the base through a network of reinforced corridors that ran along the neutron star's surface, inside individual CFA bubbles. Living in the spires was exactly as strange as it sounded, and somehow also completely ordinary. The most remarked upon thing in the early crew logs, the records that James Harker was quietly preparing for eventual public release, was not the view, though the view was extraordinary. It was not the physics, though the physics were surreal. It was the pens. Every object dropped in Foundation 1 fell exactly as it would on Earth, at the same comfortable, predictable 9.8 meters per second squared, because the CFA was doing its job. But the object's weight was a product of local CFA field conditions, not the neutron star's actual gravity. If the CFA field ever, for any reason, experienced a localized failure, not a catastrophic system failure, just a momentary gap in a single layer, the affected object would, in that instant, experience a fraction of the star's actual gravity. A pen would hit the floor with force measured not in newtons, but in something closer to what a nuclear detonation produces per square centimeter. The engineering team had calculated the probability of such a localized failure at 1 in 10 to the 19th power per second. It had never happened. But every crew member knew the number, and every crew member in those first weeks learned to put their pens down with great care. The council sent a delegation on day 61, not a diplomatic courier this time, a formal fleet formation, 7 vessels in close formation, proceeding at speeds designed to arrive at Foundation 1 with 9 days to spare before the ultimatum expired. The fleet was not armed in any aggressive configuration, but the vessels were Sarathi heavy cruisers, the largest military-grade ships in Council service, and their presence alone was a message. They stopped at the outer CFA boundary and could not proceed further. Then Sarat's communication came through on a tight beam directly to Aaron's personal channel. "Commander Mitchell, the Council fleet has encountered an obstacle." "I know," Aaron said. "I'd recommend they stay on the far side of it. You have in effect fortified a neutron star." "I've made Foundation 1 safe for its crew," Aaron said. "Anyone who approaches in peace and gives us advance notice can come right in. We'd love the visit. But I'm not leaving my people exposed. to a fleet of heavy cruisers while lawyers debate. The ultimatum expires in 9 days. I know when it expires. And if the council proceeds with the consequences outlined in the ultimatum, Aaron had spent the previous 3 nights not sleeping, thinking instead about everything the ambassador had said in that first meeting. About balance, about the gap between civilizations, about the fear of a species that could do what humans had just done. He had also thought about the 812 co-signatories and what it meant that 340 species had not signed. And he had thought about the Veth, the oldest civilization in the galaxy, who had filed no protest at all. Ambassador, Aaron said carefully, I want to ask you something directly, off the record, if you're willing. A pause. Yes, Commander. The Veth haven't said anything, 11 million years old, arguably the most powerful species in the galaxy, and they've been completely silent since we announced Foundation 1. Why? The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Aaron began to wonder if Ven Sereth was going to answer at all. The Veth, the ambassador said at last, have long memories. Of what? Of what it was like, Ven Sereth said quietly, when they were us. Aaron stood very still. They built on a neutron star. It was not a question. The ambassador's silence confirmed it. And the council forced them to stop, Aaron said. The council did not exist yet, Ven Sereth said. But those who would become the council, yes, they stopped the Veth, and the Veth in the end accepted the restriction. They had reached a point where peace and stability mattered more to them than the frontier. But they never forgot what was possible. And when humanity arrived, another pause. The Veth have been watching you very carefully, Commander, with something that, in a species 11 million years old, I believe can only be described as nostalgia. Aaron sat with that for a long moment. Then he said, tell the council fleet to stand down. We're going to resolve this another way. The proposal Aaron Mitchell submitted to the Galactic Council on day 89 was not what anyone expected. It was not a legal argument. It was not a demand. It was an invitation. The document, 40 pages long, drafted by Aaron with input from every member of his team, proposed the creation of what it called the Neutron Star Cooperative, a framework under which Foundation 1 and any future neutron star installations built by humanity would be jointly governed, jointly staffed, and jointly used by any species willing to participate under a shared set of safety and operational standards. The energy harvested from the gravity wells would flow into a common pool managed by the cooperative's board. The data processing infrastructure, which, running on the pulsar's rotation as a timing source, was capable of computational speeds that made every existing galactic data center look like a child's toy, would be available to all member species. The conditions were few. No weapons development. Full transparency on CFA technology, shared freely with all member species. A standing human majority on the operational committee. Because as Aaron wrote with characteristic directness, we built it and we know how to run it, and being honest about that is more respectful than pretending otherwise. The council deliberated for 11 days. The Veth voted first, 4. Their vote in 11 million years of galactic history had never been on the losing side of a council decision. The final tally was 9,112 in favor, 1,888 opposed. The opposition was not small. It represented a significant fraction of council membership, and the debate would continue in galactic forums for years. But the motion passed, and Foundation 1 was recognized as a legitimate habitation and operational installation under galactic law. Commander Aaron Mitchell received the official council notification in the Spire's common room, surrounded by his team. He read it aloud. When he finished, nobody said anything for a moment. Then Daniel Burke said, "Does this mean we can start on Foundation 2? You already have the plans." "I may have started them around week 4. Where were you thinking?" "PSR B1937 plus 21, Daniel said. "Millisecond pulsar, faster rotation, stronger field. The computational potential is..." He paused, visibly restraining himself. "It's a lot." "A lot," Aaron repeated. "The gravity is 312 billion G, versus our 207. "Yes." Aaron thought about it for about 3 seconds. "Get me the anchor specs. The view from Foundation 1's observation deck, the highest point of the tallest spire, enclosed in a transparent material so dense it was essentially a solid block of organized atomic structure, impervious to temperatures that would melt steel at 1,000 kilometers distance, was unlike anything that existed anywhere else in the known universe. To the north, the plasma storms raged in slow towering spirals, colors that had no human names, energies that would have annihilated the most powerful weapon ever built by any species. To the east, the horizon curved away impossibly sharply, a reminder that the world you were standing on was 10 kilometers across and contained more mass than the sun. Above, the stars were sharp and cold and eternal, and among them moved the lights of ships, human ships, Sarathi ships, and yes, in the past weeks, the unmistakable elongated forms of Veth deep space vessels come to see what all the fuss was about. Carl Preston stood beside Aaron at the observation deck on Foundation 1's first official day of open operation. Below them, a delegation of 6 Sarathi scientists was making its way through the first-floor lobby, guided by James Harker, who had turned out to be a genuinely gifted diplomat when he wasn't leaking classified information to the press. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Carl said. "What?" "That first morning on the Resolute, when you told me you wanted to cancel out the gravity. I thought you were out of your mind." "You thought I was out of my mind, and you stayed anyway," Aaron said. "I wanted to see if it would work." "And?" Carl looked out at the storms, at the stars, at the impossible fact of where they were standing, and what surrounded them on all sides. "I think it worked," he said quietly. Aaron said nothing. He was thinking about what Ven Sereth had told him, about the Veth, about what the oldest civilization in the galaxy had looked like when it was young enough to believe that the most dangerous place in the universe was a real estate opportunity. 11 million years ago, some ancient Veth engineer had probably stood somewhere very much like this and felt exactly what Aaron was feeling right now. And then, been told to stop. Humanity had not been told to stop. Not ultimately. The Council had pushed, and humanity had pushed back, and what had come out the other side of that collision was something neither side had predicted. Not a confrontation, but a partnership. Not a war over access, but a cooperative built on the principle that the most extraordinary environments in the universe belonged to whoever was brave enough, or stubborn enough, to reach them. Aaron Mitchell was not an especially philosophical man. He preferred concrete things, materials, field equations, construction tolerances, but standing on a neutron star, watching alien ships orbit in the middle distance, he found himself thinking something he suspected would embarrass him to say out loud. The universe had rules. Physics was physics. Gravity was gravity. A neutron star was 200 billion times the gravity of Earth, and that was simply what it was. Humans just didn't take instructions well. It was a thing every other species had known about humanity for centuries, and had found alternately charming and terrifying and occasionally infuriating. But standing here, at the edge of what was possible, Aaron thought it was less a character flaw and more a design feature. Something evolution had built into the species not despite the danger, but because of it. A fundamental inability to look at an obstacle and accept it as permanent. The universe said no. Humanity asked why. And somewhere in the gap between those two things, impossibly, something new was built. Foundation 2, Carl said, finally. Foundation 2, Aaron confirmed. And then, Aaron watched the plasma storms paint the horizon in colors without names. Then he said, "We see how far this goes." The stars had no answer for that. They just kept burning, the way stars always had. Indifferent to what the small, brief, impossibly stubborn creatures moving between them might build next. But somewhere among those stars, in the oldest ships built by the oldest minds in the galaxy, the Veth watched and remembered, and for the first time in 11 million years, felt something that might, in a species that old, have once been called hope. If you've made it this far, you already know. This is the kind of story that sticks with you. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. Which foundation would you want to live on? And if you're not subscribed to HFY Endurance Tales yet, hit that button, because we're just getting started, and you do not want to miss what's coming next.